What if the police knocked on your door one day and accused you of murder? What if you told them you were innocent again and again and again? What if they put you in a maximum security prison, never to be released?
You have a prepaid call from an incarcerated individual.
Paul Denham.
Paul Denham has been in prison for over 25 years.
Paul went away and never came back again.
Life without possibility of parole means exactly that. You'll die in prison.
For a murder he says he didn't commit.
Nothing directly links Paul to the murder. Paul was 350 miles away.
The victim, his wife's lover.
The two biggest reasons why people commit murder are love and money.
Now here's the thing. A lot of people believe him, but a lot of people don't.
The jealousy motive was undeniably strong.
He's not the fighting type. It's not him.
Paul's story is a twisting tale of love, guns, and corruption.
Paul was the main suspect.
If he couldn't have this woman, nobody could.
But who do you believe? The cops?
Although circumstantial, it was overwhelming.
Is Paul guilty? Is it him?
The lawyers?
Why would you say that you do not have a gun when you do, in fact, have a gun?
It is all or nothing.
The friends?
I don't think he had it in him to do it.
None of this made sense. Why him?
Or the man himself?
I have never killed anyone. I am innocent.
I cannot answer, and I will not answer those questions.
It's the 12th of March, 1995, in Los Angeles. Just off the 405 freeway, one of the busiest roads in the United States, a man is found with a bullet wound in the side of his head. The victim is 25-year-old postal worker, Eddie Weinman. Damage to the car indicates it crashed at speed into the lane barriers. Eddie was clearly shot whilst driving from another moving vehicle.
The suspect vehicle pulls up alongside Eddie's vehicle on the driver's side. We don't know how fast they were going. They fire 2 rounds into the car, breaks the window. The round fragments. One shears off and goes behind the driver's seat on the floor. 2 fragments go into Eddie's left temple, killing him instantly. Eddie was looking straight ahead, and he probably never knew what hit him. He probably heard the glass break momentarily, and then he was out.
Eddie's murder is one of 876 gun-related homicides in Los Angeles in 1995. But shooting car to car at speed is an act that takes considerable marksmanship.
It is, I'm gonna say, impossible to shoot a moving vehicle from the driver's side of your vehicle at a downward angle. In order to kill someone up close and personal, you really have to have the will to do that. You're really angry with the person, or you're trained to do it.
Police focus on one suspect, Paul Denham, a British immigrant living in Los Angeles. They believe he's killed Eddie in a crime of passion. because Eddie has been seeing Paul's wife, Dolores Legaspi.
This is a love triangle case. Paul was the main suspect.
Their motive is that because I was married to Dolores and they're claiming Dolores was having a relationship with the victim, then I would have a motive for doing away with the victim.
So just how did a young lad from South London end up on foreign soil, jailed for life without parole?
A guy came up and he put a gun in my face, and then I realized I was being arrested. That's what I'd be out in a week. I'm still in custody.
I met Paul when we were both 11. When we started secondary school, we both come from council estates. Nice kid, really kind kid.
Paul was a really intelligent lad. A few of us were quite sort of rough and ready, scallywags. Paul was really switched on. He was very good at making things.
He was a bit eccentric, even from an early age. He was just fun. Yeah, he was different.
We were just kids, you know. Yeah, we like mess around and do stuff. We played golf up in the fields. We used to go fishing a lot. We did everything together.
Paul is extremely technical, very clever and creative. Something which was well outside the usual remit of a late teenager from Eltham. It was marvellous. He had a plan to start his own business.
Fresh out of school, Paul has dreams of turning his creative edge into profit and launches a vinyl car sticker business. But his ambitions of building an empire take him away from the familiar surroundings of his hometown.
He would literally cut out a vinyl by hand with a scalpel and sell them to kids with cars, and he gradually built this up into a business. Next thing I heard, he'd gone, and he'd gone to the States.
It's the land where you can be creative, be yourself, perhaps make a fortune, build a business, and be successful. I can certainly see some of those aspects of moving to the States appealing to Paul to make his home, set up a business, and provide a living. Paul went away and he never came back again.
It's here, in the USA, where Paul has a chance meeting that changes his life forever. Whilst traveling in California, Paul meets 20-year-old Dolores Legaspi.
I'd met Dolores. She was working in a youth hospital in San Pedro, California. I stayed there, and so I was corresponding with her, and we went backwards and forwards. And then she came over to Europe, and we went around Europe, and then we just like grew stronger together.
He'd met this girl and he said he was absolutely besotted with her, which is unusual for Paul to say something like that, because he never really had girlfriends before that I knew of.
Paul and Dolores quickly become infatuated with each other, and a long-distance relationship blossoms.
Paul went on several dates with Dolores. He returned to England, and he and Dolores would have telephone conversations and write to each other. Looking at these letters that Paul wrote to Dolores, one thing is crystal clear, that he was in love with her. He very much wanted to be with Dolores.
But is a big secret about to rip apart the romance?
Paul and Dolores are out on a date, and that's where, for the very first time, Dolores mentions that, oh, she's also seeing this other guy named Eddie. So it was very early on in the relationship between Paul and Dolores that this love triangle surfaces.
Edward Wyman was a friend of Dolores Legaspi's, and I think they may have gone to school together. That's my understanding.
even though he knows about Eddie. Paul and Dolores get hitched in Las Vegas, a year after they first meet. But they keep the wedding a secret.
We got married in '94. I couldn't start a business without being married. I just couldn't come to America and start a business or buy a house. I needed a green card to stay in America.
Since his incarceration, Paul claims his marriage to Dolores was purely for the sake of obtaining a visa to stay in America. A marriage of convenience. But those who know the case think there is more to this than meets the eye.
The story of Paul's case varies wildly, depending on who you ask. He was absolutely romantically interested in her. This was not just something that was done for a green card. But she, of course, had had a long-standing, intimate relationship with Edward Weinman.
At the time of her marriage to Paul, Dolores's relationship with Eddie Weinman has been on and off for over 10 years. And it's not long before Eddie crosses paths with Dolores's new husband.
When Paul meets Eddie for the very first time, Paul's going out to dinner with Dolores and her sister. They're just leaving when Eddie arrives on the scene, and Dolores says, "Hey, let me go handle this."
When we were going out for a meal, that guy showed up in a car and was arguing with Dolores. He's like a nutcase arguing with Dolores. When Dolores came back, this guy was roasting. We were in a residential area with little kids playing. He's roasting in his car in front of the driveway through the neighborhood.
Edward was dating Dolores for many years. He didn't like it when he found out Paul was in the picture. This jealousy, it wasn't just a one-way street. Eddie, I'm sure, was threatened by Paul's existence and Paul by Eddie's. They both wanted the other out of the picture when it came to Dolores. So is it any surprise what happened next?
An old friend from our estate in Eltham, he said to me, "Did you hear about what happened to Paul Denham? He's been locked up and he's not going to be released ever again." And I was gobsmacked.
But how could Paul be guilty if, as he claims, he wasn't even in the same city when Eddie was shot?
Paul has an airtight alibi. Paul was 350 miles away. He couldn't have done it, and he has the receipts to prove it.
Los Angeles means the city of the angels, but down below the glittering lights of Hollywood and Bel Air, the streets are far from angelic.
The 90s were kind of a crazy time in Los Angeles. Gang violence and drive-by shootings were kind of a new thing. Areas like Compton and Inglewood were incredibly violent, dangerous places.
I worked the entire city. The gang crime was out of control. You had a lot of violence, a lot of shootings, a lot of murders, gang-related murders mostly, and a lot of that was because of gang territory. Violence had increased because of the crack cocaine trade. Gangs were at war.
I tell you to step out, especially Friday and Saturday night, they start drinking and then they start fighting. It's just the national pastime down here on this footbeat.
There was so much going on between the Rodney King riots and the O.J. Simpson case. There was a lot of crime. People didn't necessarily trust police. It was tense.
Despite the City of Angels being far from a safe haven in the 1990s, Paul and Dolores rent an apartment in Reseda, 20 miles northeast from the bright lights of downtown LA. But soon after moving in, they are burgled.
The police came and then they did a report, and it wasn't a good experience, and that's why I got the firearm.
Paul purchases a .380 caliber Lawson handgun, one of America's more affordable firearms, priced at around $100 over the counter. But is arming yourself after one break-in taking things too far?
If you have a lot of burglaries in your neighborhood and the police department is slow to react because of the amount of calls, then you want to protect yourself.
Paul allegedly, after reporting the burglary to police, the police say to him, well, maybe you should get a gun in order to protect your property. Frankly, I don't believe it for a second. You're entitled to use deadly force to protect your person. You're not entitled to use deadly force to protect property. Sounds like a really convenient justification for having a gun.
Following the burglary, Paul looks at homes in Palmdale, a quieter Los Angeles suburb.
Paul, I remember he would talk about motorcycling when he lived in England. He liked riding motorcycles, sport bikes, nice accent. Only British people I knew were rock stars. He was a good neighbor, never had problems. He was always very chill and funny guy.
However, Paul spends the majority of his time living with Dolores's parents, whilst she continues to share her affections between her husband and Eddie Weinman.
According to Eddie's mother, Eddie considered Dolores to be his girlfriend. They talked about marriage. They were intimate with each other. They were together.
The love triangle shows no signs of fizzling out, which makes what happens next even more curious. Six months after Paul and Dolores's wedding, Eddie Weinman's family home is vandalized.
KKK house was spray painted on their property. There was some type of Confederate flag flying on the inside of the Weinman house that you could see when you walked by. And that enraged people in the neighborhood, and that's why they got tagged with the KKK house, and they wanted them to leave.
The Weinman family do leave and move house, but the hostility continues, becoming increasingly violent.
A 34-ounce glass bottle and a greenish-blue cloth wick stuck in the neck of the bottle was lit and thrown on top of a metal awning that's attached to the south side of the house.
I can tell you in my 20 years, I've never had a situation where anybody threw a Molotov cocktail, ever. Was this a situation where someone was just trying to intimidate them and maybe just disrupt their whole routine? Clearly, you're a target.
Whoever did the vandalism really hated somebody in the Weinman family. If they're using Molotov cocktails, that's someone with some kind of experience or history or knowledge of what scares people. They want you out of there.
Eddie's home is hit with more Molotov bombs, one setting fire to the living room. In just over a month, his family is attacked 7 times.
One of the things that we know for sure is there is an independent, credible witness who says it was 2 black males who he observed throwing the Molotov cocktails and then running away from the location. These are really serious events. They tend to show that there was somebody who really had it in for Eddie.
The following month, Eddie is dead. But before he meets his fate, he is attacked once again.
Eddie was going to school at Los Angeles Harbor College, taking some classes there. After class one night, Eddie is walking back to his car, and he's with a female classmate, a woman named Lorna. Eddie then goes to get into his car. And is surprised by an attacker who is lying in wait in the back seat. A struggle ensues. A gunshot rings out. Eddie isn't hit by the gunshot, but it penetrates his sweatshirt. It narrowly misses him.
The shooter made a homemade silencer to hide the sound of the gunshot. This particular silencer had a T-shirt inside of it to muffle the sound. You had the cardboard box, you had the paint to make it black, and then you had the tape. So those are all four components the shooter had to think about to put that together. That suggests to me that the person that did that wasn't experienced at killing people up close and personal, but they still wanted to kill Eddie. They just didn't know the right way to do it, and they had a failed attempt. I believe this was personal.
There is only one other witness to the attempted murder, Eddie's classmate, Lorna. During the attack, she gets a good look at the perpetrator.
Lorna describes the attacker as being a tall, possibly Caucasian or Latino male. Victims rarely are able to give good, clear descriptions of their attacker. They've got the adrenaline, the emotion surrounding that event. Eddie's not going to be in a position to really have an accurate description of the assailant. In the days following the attack, the officer involved sees Eddie and asks Eddie, hey, is there anybody that you think might have done this? Eddie has a hard time coming up with any answer. And then he says kind of begrudgingly, well, you know, I really don't, but, you know, maybe there's this one guy who kind of likes my girlfriend. That's where this idea of looking at Paul possibly has its genesis. The idea that it's a love triangle. The jealousy motive was undeniably strong. Someone was out to get Eddie Weinman. The question is, was it Paul or was it someone else?
Eddie Weinman has been the victim of numerous violent attacks, including Molotov bombs and a failed murder attempt. His girlfriend, Dolores, is standing by him, despite being married to Paul Denham.
Legaspi stated that she and Paul had taken a trip to Las Vegas and that she left early to spend the Friday, Saturday, and Sunday with Eddie. Paul was upset and wanted to know where she was going to go. On February 18th, Paul followed her and Eddie to Eddie's house. Both she and Eddie knew Paul was behind them on the southbound 405 freeway. Eddie was freaking out, so he exited, and Paul parked the van on a service road.
Dolores confronted Paul and asked him, "What are you doing?" And he said he was running an errand. The following of Eddie and Dolores is huge because it suggested that he was thinking about hurting Eddie early on.
Could this be Paul plotting to kill Eddie by following his route home? Or is it simply a misunderstanding?
That's a bad fact for Paul, right? It's certainly creepy. If you're asking the prosecutor, they're going to say, well, Paul Denham engaged in conduct that could really be described as stalking, all in the name of accomplishing murder.
The murder of Eddie Weinman happened on the southbound 405 freeway at the Cherry off-ramp. Whoever killed Eddie knew his routine. The night he's killed, he's followed. Whoever killed him knew his departure point to his next arrival point, because the area where he was killed is on his normal route home. The shot is left to right and downward. So the vehicle they were traveling in had to be a little higher than Eddie's Honda. They had to remove Eddie from the passenger side because once he came to rest, his vehicle was up against the guardrail. They couldn't get him out that side.
The officers tasked with figuring out who shot Eddie in cold blood are Detective Brian McMahon and his partner, Estela Martinez.
McMahon and Martinez were two of the better homicide detectives at that time in 1995. Brian actually trained me when I was a rookie, when I was working undercover. Martinez, we had personal friends together, so I knew both of them pretty well. And they were pretty hard-charging, no-nonsense police officers.
At first glance, this isn't a straightforward case. The chilling scene throws up more questions than answers. Who could commit a crime like this?
We were having a serious problem with shootings on the freeway. You know, a lot of it was road rage. It could be that there were cars who knew each other and had some sort of history between them. They weren't just spraying and praying that they hit a target. They were pretty accurate. And so, was it luck or was it marksmanship? These are the kinds of questions that a good investigator wants to get the answers to.
You're talking about the most crowded, congested freeway probably in the entire United States. So the idea that you're gonna know exactly where somebody's gonna be at a particular point in time, it's like finding a needle in a haystack.
Given his jealousy of Eddie is no secret, Paul is the prime suspect. But are the circumstances all too complicated for a man who's never committed a crime before?
Even if he did plan this sophisticated, elaborate situation where he could go and kill Eddie, how is he gonna know where he was at that time? The idea that Paul could be at the right spot, at the right time to pull the trigger. It's tough to even wrap your head around that. That's a tricky one.
I think I'm pretty quiet. I usually have like a happy demeanor. I joke around quite a bit. I never argued during my life. I've never killed anyone whatsoever.
Shooting someone, you know, in the head, it's pretty hardcore, isn't it? I don't think he had it in him to do it.
He was a calm person, he didn't drink. Nerdy white Paul, gunning down somebody in the streets. Why him? Just none of this made sense.
Whilst delivering the painful news to Eddie's parents, detectives get their first insight into the complicated love triangle and a potential clue.
This is from a police report with an interview with Eddie Weinman's parents the day that they were informed of their son's death. While we were making the notification to the family, Mr. Weinman said his wife had received a phone call from a male. The person said "Tell Eddie to leave my wife alone or I will kill him." The Weinmans related that they had talked to Eddie and Dolores about the phone call, and they told him it was just a joke from a drunk friend of theirs. Whether it was a joke, whether it was serious, someone made a threatening phone call to the Weinman family home, specifically mentioning their wife, Dolores Legaspi. How could this not have been Paul?
When Mr. Wyman was immediately notified that his son had been shot and killed, he said to the police that he knew that that would happen because of all the arson bombers on the house and the KKK riding on the house. Mrs. Wyman says, yeah, she received a threatening phone call. There was no threatening phone call. No threatening phone call existed.
Stalking, jealousy, an alleged threatening phone call. Paul Denham is the #1 suspect and brought in for questioning. But it doesn't go quite as he expects.
As early as 5 days after the murder, Paul became a person of interest.
In the police station, I was on one side of the table, and the detective was on the other side of the table. She just jumped up out of her chair and started screaming and shouting at me. He ran around the table, he put my head in an arm lock, was bashing the side of my face. He was trying to say, anyway, shot him, which way shot him, which way shot him. And it was berserk. It was like 1 minute I was just answering questions, and they just went berserk on me, both of them. Then I just shut down. I wouldn't answer no more questions. I had nothing to do with them. I just wanted to get the hell out of there.
Paul claims he is intimidated, threatened, and physically harmed during his police interview. And soon after, his belongings are searched.
We know Paul had bought a gun. Some people would call that means. And according to police, when they asked Paul, "Do you own any guns?" Paul says no. Then they find the firearms sales records and they show that, nope, in fact, Paul just bought this gun.
Why would you say that you do not have a gun when you do, in fact, have a gun?
Is Paul lying about owning his gun? Or is he just not thinking straight after his police interview?
An innocent person would say, I know that this looks bad, but I own a gun. Or, yes, I do have a gun. I bought it on this day at this time, but I haven't used it. But the fact that he made a choice to lie about it is in and of itself evidence, and it's powerful evidence. It's damning.
You start to marry these various items of circumstantial evidence together, case looks pretty bad from Paul's perspective.
Police searched twice more before eventually finding crucial pieces of evidence.
McMahon and Martinez conducted a search at the Legaspi residence where Paul had been staying. Amongst that, they found a black can of spray paint, a roll of duct tape, and the tape that they recover matches the tape on the end of the silencer that was used at the time of the attempt murder. Although circumstantial, it was overwhelming.
The criminalist testified that a roll of duct tape from my home matched 100% to the end of the yellow tape attached to a silencer found at the crime scene. That's not true. The evidence was manufactured to create a match that would otherwise exist.
Paul's claim that evidence was manufactured has never been proven. But at the time in 90s LA, the city and its surrounding neighborhoods were rife with police corruption, with dozens of officers proven to have planted or falsified evidence.
Was there corruption and misconduct going on in the 90s? Absolutely. I saw it, I reported it, I was not part of it. I took my oath of office seriously.
Could Paul make a homemade silencer? Or has the tape been secretly planted as evidence?
Nobody would have known to put yellow tape in his garage. No one would have known that he had or was building a silencer. Right? No one would have known these things.
Paul's methodical. If he's going to do something, he wants to do it right. If he's going to do something, he'd take his time doing it. He wouldn't go to the point of wrapping a bit of tape around a bit of cloth and sticking it on the end of a gun. It's just not Paul. Doesn't add up.
Paul's friends find it hard to believe Paul is involved, but the circumstantial evidence is beginning to add up. And the pressure is mounting.
There's premeditation, there's planning, there's the lack of his gun. It's missing. Don't know if it was used in the crime or not, but it's gone. Where is it?
The two biggest reasons why people commit murder are love and money.
Love and money are the fuel that ignite this fire inside of us that oftentimes can result in death.
Police say that Paul is jealous and possessive and carried out 2 crimes that both required sophistication and planning. Prosecutors say that Paul got a gun. Paul also fashioned a silencer using cardboard, a t-shirt, and a roll of tape. Paul attempted to kill Eddie first in a college parking lot, but failed in that attempt. Finally, Paul finished the job just 2 months later by killing Eddie as he drove on the freeway. Paul Denham had the idea that if he couldn't have this woman, nobody could. And of course, Paul tells a remarkably different story.
At the time of the shooting, I wasn't even in the Los Angeles area. I was more than 350 miles away up in San Francisco. My medical records show that I have a fractured hand. It needed a big mitt to cover it. It was augmented with a splint. And it would have taken about, I think, 4 to maybe 6 weeks to heal. I could not have shot anyone with my hand in a cast like that.
The last time I saw Paul, I was 20 years old. People do their different things or go their different ways. And then the next thing I heard was, he was in prison, which was a bit of a shock, I must admit. Whether he did it or not, I don't know, but I don't think he would have done it.
Detectives believe Paul Denham is guilty of shooting his wife's lover, Eddie Weinman, in an act of jealousy. But maybe Paul couldn't have pulled the trigger.
I went to the Castle Mall. When I came out of the mall, there were 2 black guys. They stopped me, asked me questions, trying to rob me. One of them pulled the gun out and shot me.
Paul claims he has been shot in his left hand with severe damage between his ring finger and little finger. Medical records even show his hand is in a cast at the time of Eddie's murder. But are the circumstances surrounding the injury suspicious?
He said he was robbed by 2 male blacks and he was shot in the left hand while he was defending himself. I don't believe it happened. Usually, if you're having a gun pointed at you, and just out of instinct, people put their hands up for defense, right? And your palms are out like this. It's gonna go through your hand, right? And hit your body. To me, it looked like he accidentally shot himself manipulating his gun, or was done on purpose.
regardless of who shot Paul. Could he fire a gun and drive a car at the same time with just one working hand? And an even bigger question: what if Paul wasn't even in Los Angeles at the time of Eddie's murder?
On Sunday, March 12, 1995, at about 5 o'clock in the morning, I headed north on the 405 up towards San Francisco. I arrived up in San Francisco about noon on Sunday. I was going up there to buy business equipment.
When the detectives contacted Paul, he took out a map and gave them a detailed directions and description of where he stopped and where he was, and actually outlined his route. He also provided them with receipts of the locations he stopped at and obtained receipts to prove where he was. He was 350 miles away.
He has receipts to show that he drove up there. He's got receipts for food, for gas. But the problem is, there's an 11-hour gap in the receipts. Paul says he's got an explanation for this. He started his trip really early in the morning. He got to this residential area, took a nap, woke up, did some sightseeing, and it's just natural that there's this gap in the receipts, which kind of makes sense, right? People don't keep receipts for every moment in their life.
The 11-hour gap in Paul's receipts covers the exact time of Eddie's murder. Is this a slip-up from Paul? Or is there an innocent reason for the space in his timeline?
As a detective, you try to figure out how the suspect committed that crime. If Paul was involved, how that happened. He was in San Francisco, allegedly, at the time of the murder. Well, how would I do it? Would I drive? No, that would take too long. Can I fly? Yes.
That 11-hour gap leaves plenty of time for Paul to get on a plane in San Francisco, fly back down to LA, commit the killing, fly back to San Francisco, and then pick up his tracks to start creating more false alibi.
Detectives had some work to do to prove or disprove his alibi. They decided to follow his route.
Using Paul's receipts, detectives McMahon and Martinez recreate the journey from Los Angeles to San Francisco.
I envisioned them leaving Long Beach at the same time Paul did. They drove up, same route that Paul did, and went to San Francisco airport, and they started investigating the long-term parking facilities. They were actually able to run the license plate number, and they got a hit. When they got the license plate number, they saw that the time frame of the car entering and exiting was almost exactly the 11 hours that Paul had for an alibi. So now you're thinking, we got him.
However, Paul claims his car never enters San Francisco airport. And detectives find no record of him hiring a vehicle in Los Angeles.
In 11-hour span, where the police have no receipts for me, I would have been traveling around and eating the various places in the San Jose area and in the San Francisco area. I also would have stopped to have a rest. I am innocent, and I had alibis to back up my innocence.
If Paul was such a criminal mastermind, why would there be an 11-hour window with absolutely no receipts? Why wouldn't he collect some other receipts from some other businesses during that time period? It's not a difficult thing to do.
Detectives search the flight manifests, but there is no record of Paul's name on any airline document from the day of the murder.
Even if your name is not on a flight manifest, in 1995, you could get on a flight with no ID.
During that time, you could pay cash for a ticket. Your name wasn't on it. You could board and no one would be the wiser. The fact that his name does not appear on a manifest is not evidence that he didn't take a flight, right? All it is evidence that he didn't have his name on a ticket.
The nail in the coffin for Paul's case were those airport parking records.
The net is closing on Paul Denham, and test results from one final, crucial piece of evidence tightens it further.
The prosecution had ballistics from my hand when I was shot at the Castle Mall. The prosecution theory was that I shot myself with my firearm. Therefore, on that theory, the ballistics from my hand could be used to compare with the ballistics from the two crime scenes.
Bullet fragments taken from the scene of the murder, attempted murder, and Paul's injured hand are tested, and they match. All three incidents appear likely to have been shot from the same type of gun.
We know that he owned a .380 caliber. We know that he had a motive, and the biggest one is opportunity. He had a time frame where his whereabouts were completely unaccounted for. Who else had the opportunity, the motive? Those are big circumstantial pieces of evidence.
After an extensive police investigation, Paul is charged with the murder of Eddie Weinman. His fate now lies in the hands of a jury.
I'm Ed Robinson, and I was Paul Denham's trial attorney. The strength of their case came from the fact that Paul, and I'm adopting their theory, had an interest in Dolores Legaspi, and that he had a motive to kill Eddie.
A key piece of evidence is introduced to the court. Details of an interview between Paul and police officers.
Paul had stated to the detective he loved Dolores and that he was resentful of Dolores's relationship with Eddie. Paul himself said, "I know it doesn't look good for me." Paul had made complaints about having been physically abused by the interviewing detective. And our position was that the cops never advised him of his rights, and therefore everything that Paul had said should not come in against him in the prosecution's case. Judge Romero, after having heard the evidence, made the conclusion that Paul had not been the victim of any type of physical violence that would cause him to make an involuntary statement. Because of those findings, the prosecution was able to introduce everything that Paul had said.
During the 2-week trial, neither Paul or Dolores take to the witness stand.
Paul didn't testify at trial. He could have debunked a lot of the prosecution's accusations.
If we had called Dolores as a witness for the defense, she would not have been a good witness. We didn't want to put Dolores on the stand. We didn't have forensic evidence that would have helped Paul. We were stuck.
But under the glare of the courtroom, Paul's defense continues to fight back. Does Paul have a solid alibi? Or are there too many coincidences to ignore?
Nobody claims to have observed Paul shooting Eddie.
Paul had an injury to his left hand. The shooter shot from a moving vehicle at another moving vehicle. In order to carry out that type of murder, you have to have done it before,
Surely, if your hand is in a bulky mitt, you couldn't drive a car and shoot a gun at the same time.
How do you drive on the 405 freeway, maintain whatever speed you need to align yourself with the car, and then get off a round that's perfect in a downward trajectory? Was it a lucky shot? Was someone else driving and there was a passenger who fired from whatever vehicle it was? Is Paul guilty? Is it him?
In the United States, in order for a conviction to occur, all 12 jurors have to agree that the government has proven each element of the crime beyond a reasonable doubt. It is all or nothing.
We know that jurors make up their mind early in a trial and then they justify it with evidence that they hear along the way. There were no witnesses called. There was no physical evidence put into the record. It just didn't give the jury anything to hang their hat on in order to acquit Paul. And that was one of the big problems for Paul in this trial. The ultimate question is, who's the jury going to believe?
In September 1998, 30-year-old Paul Denham is found guilty of murdering Eddie Weinman, receiving a life sentence without parole.
Circumstantial evidence was enough for this jury to convict Paul of the murder. You don't need to see somebody with their hand in the cookie jar to know they ate the cookies.
Life without possibility of parole means exactly that. You'll die in prison.
As Paul begins to spend the rest of his life behind bars, the detectives who put him there, McMahon and Martinez, are commended.
This case was a big deal. McMahon and Martinez won a huge award for that. The tenacity and the continuous drive to solve the case is why they got that award.
But Paul believes he's been framed. Could he have been the victim of unfair treatment?
I decided to file a complaint on the officers because they had assaulted me during an interview back in March of that year. I thought if I filed a complaint, then it would get resolved, you know? It does not work like that over here.
I think the fact that he's not from this country certainly put him at a disadvantage. If you've never dealt with law enforcement, if you don't know what that looks like, feels like, smells like, and then you find yourself the subject of a lot of attention, you don't know what to do.
So I filed the first complaint, and then a few days later, the police showed up at my Farmdale house. They tore the house up, he slapped me on the face, and told me that he was retaliating because of my complaints, and if I file more complaints, he'll retaliate further.
Paul could have easily been caught up in that loop of just not knowing what to do. Who do I tell? Where do I go? Who's going to believe me?
Paul even argues that some of the compelling evidence used against him is unreliable.
One of the really fascinating pieces of evidence to me is the receipt from the long-term parking lot at the San Francisco airport. If you carefully look at the receipt, it says that the year of the receipt is 1985, a full decade before this murder took place. Remember, this is the 90s. There's no AI, there's no images being gathered. What it is it's a worker in that parking structure who sees a camera image of the license plate. They then write it down. They then transpose what they've written into the computer. So there's several opportunities for human error in all of this. That's amazing material for Paul to put in front of the jury. The problem is, Paul's lawyer didn't put any of this in front of the jury.
Unhappy with how his case was presented to the court, Paul fires his defense attorney, Ed Robinson, a few days before his sentencing.
I don't have, after all these years, much of an ego left about others evaluating my performance. If I'm in a situation where I'm persuaded that I didn't do something that I should have done, I don't have a problem, declaring that, because I want to see justice done.
A small piece of paper discovered during a search also plays a big part in Paul's conviction, suggesting he did get on a plane to LA and murder Eddie.
The police searched the Legaspi residence where Paul had been staying. They found a piece of paper with 2 different airline numbers on it.
The officer testified that he searched my belongings 4 days after the murder and found a handwritten document with the airlines on it and the phone numbers. That's significant because that effectively placed me on 2 planes, one leaving San Francisco and the other one returning to San Francisco. That is critical evidence, and it's shown to be relevant evidence material in my case and necessary for the jury to convict me.
But does the note belong to Paul?
The officer is manufacturing false evidence and deliberately framing me.
In 2015, the note is analysed by a handwriting expert.
My name is Jennifer Sheets, and I'm a criminal defense attorney focused on post-conviction cases. Paul had that reviewed by a writing expert, and the writing expert actually found that that note that the police officer claimed he found at Paul's was written by the police officer himself.
The expert examines examples of Paul's handwriting from his love letters to Dolores and Detective McMahon's police documents. Numbers and letters taken from the original piece of evidence are compared to Detective McMahon's writing, and they bear a striking resemblance.
We now know that the note was allegedly, according to an expert, written by the detective. And so if he would write that note and make a big deal about that and lie, what else would he lie about and fabricate?
Handwriting is one of those gray areas where it's not considered an absolute science. If that piece of evidence was manufactured by a detective, the only person that would know that would be the detective and the defendant. As a prosecutor, we have a certain amount of trust that we give to our officers. This detective is giving up their reputation over one case, over one piece of evidence. Does that happen? Yes. Do we know for sure whether or not it happened in this case? No.
If this handwritten note was written by Detective McMahon, the whole case is compromised. If you can't trust the messenger, you can't trust the message.
It's not uncommon for officers, and I like to think that they're in the minority, who will manufacture probable cause to detain someone. I call that contempt of cop. You piss me off during an encounter, and there's a price to pay. There were complaints that Paul was making about this lead detective, and so was this contempt of cop? Was this payback? You pissed me off. Now, I don't know if you really did this thing, but I'm gonna figure out how to say you did it. And then there's no reason for me to look anywhere else. There's no reason for me to consider anything else. I don't want to talk to anybody. I don't want to hear anything. La, 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 la. It's Paul.
Paul's allegations have never been proven, but he is still protesting his innocence. And back in England, Paul's friends are determined to fight and see his murder conviction overturned.
I'd love to sit face to face without anybody hearing, look him in the eye and say, did you do it? I think a lot of people would have given up years ago.
You have a prepaid call from an incarcerated individual at the California State Prison.
Hello, Paul speaking.
How you doing, Paul? It's Nick Watts here, your old mate.
Hey, you sound just like me in Buddyfoot. Hey, I sound American, don't I?
You do sound American.
Yeah, I've been here for 30 years.
It'd be good to get you back.
Yeah, it'd be nice to get some fish and chips. I have no idea where I'm going to be now.
I feel sad and sorry for the guy having that time in prison, which is an incredible amount of time. He's had enough.
Paul's friends are raising money to help fund the re-evaluation of evidence. They want Paul's conviction overturned.
We raised about £10,000 for Paul, which we've used for handwriting experts, legal stuff. Some of it paid for private investigators for things that Paul wanted looked into and looked at out in America. To get things done, he needs help from the outside, which is what we've tried to do, but from the UK, we're finding it hard. You really need an American lawyer to help. It's the only way.
I found out about Paul's case because I have another pro bono case that I'm working on out of Long Beach as well. Paul asked me to help him. His hope was for forensic testing to show that the evidence that was used to convict him was not what it seemed. The prosecution's theory, and it's really important to remember this, their theory was he was acting alone.
I've investigated quite a few freeway shootings. When the victim is shot on the driver's side through the driver's side window, it's usually the passenger in the vehicle shooting, and there's a driver of that vehicle. And that's why I believe there were two suspects in this case. There was a driver and there was a shooter.
A life sentence without parole is one of the harshest sentences a judge can serve. On average, only 13% of appeals are successful in the United States.
If this case occurred today, I think it would be very, very different. One of two things would have happened. We would have had cell phone data that showed his travel movements and his whereabouts, or an app that was used to get an Uber or a Lyft to drive him, or we would have some kind of physical extrinsic data to show the jury this is what happened. If we had the exact same facts, I think today that case would likely end up in a hung jury.
In all the years I knew him, he's not the fighting type. He's not confrontational. He's anti-confrontational. I can't see him falling into a category of person that's able to commit something so dreadful. It's not him.
To actually go and, take someone's life for being jealous, I wouldn't think so.
Whenever a human life is taken, that trumps everything. Ultimately, nothing directly links Paul to the murder, but 12 of his peers still found him guilty.
If you were to ask me, did Paul tell you he did it, or did Paul say he's innocent? Did Paul say anything? I cannot answer, and I will not answer those questions. And if you were to ask me, do I believe the jury verdict is accurate, I would say I can't answer that. Just as a human being, I hope that Paul's okay.
They have their own narrative. The truth doesn't work with their theory. So they manufacture their own narrative. It's just nonsense. Everything that could go wrong did go wrong.
You have a love triangle. You have someone who left their entire life, their country, to be with this person. There was a lot going on behind the scenes between these three people that none of us will ever know.
I don't know if the question was asked, who did Dolores want to be with, Eddie or Paul? Well, she lost both of them, but maybe that wasn't the plan. Who wanted to kill Eddie? I don't know.
Lurching from scandal to scandal, but now his finances are in the spotlight. Prince Andrew, Where Did All the Money Go? Is brand new Saturday at 9:30. Next, we join the forensics on the hunt for a killer at the crime scene.